Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was this week in 1985 that Tears for Fears hit it big when their song Shout became a number one hit. Now, I want to talk a bit about the album from which this came, Songs from the Big Chair, because in many ways this represented the peak of 80s post new wave, synth pop, synth rock, call it what you will. But far from just being a pop band, Tears for Fears were really quite progressive with what they did on songs from the Big Chair. There were already hints of it on their debut album, The Hurting. But by this time, by the mid 80s, they were really doing something that was quite extraordinary in that they were recording an album much like sort of Pet Sounds or Sergeant Pepper's, used the entire music studio as an instrument. Normally, I'm not even a big fan of the overuse of overdubs, but on this album, using 48 tracks, two 24 tracks sort of daisy chained together, they layered and layered various synthesizers, various organic keyboard instruments like organ, various pianos, brass instruments, guitars, basses, so many drums and percussion instruments. And the layering created a sort of wall of sound that was fit for the 80s. So you've got Phil Spector in the 60s who used the studio as an instrument. Then we talked about Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, George Martin, the fifth Beatle, if you will, and Tears for Fears in the 80s, who, especially later on, were compared to the Beatles. They, on this album, they took on the mantle of using the studio as an instrument, but using all of the latest 80s technology, drum machines, electronic drums, Fairlight CMI, and other ultra modern synthesizers of the day. And it created an album that was really one of the best in its genre. In fact, you could really say that along with the later albums that Talk did, which were almost a rebellion against this 80s style, but were nevertheless still, at least in the case of Color of Spring, in the 80s. What Tears for Fears accomplished with songs from the Big Chair was really to create a perfect album for that genre, that sort of synthy pop rock 80s genre. And there was not a single bad song on it. It opens up with Shout, a kind of declaratory a statement that could be sung at karaoke as easily as it could be listened to on FM radio. Again, one of those timeless songs, The Working Hour, a kind of up-tempo ballad. Everybody wants to rule the world, absolute classic, a song that really the writing is so strong that it really could have been played on an acoustic guitar or piano and worked. It didn't need the overdubs and the sort of larger than life production to work, but it was that larger than life production that really made it big. Turning to side two, wonderful song, one of the best songs ever, frankly. And this is Head Over Heels. Wonderful song. And I think it's here where, even though, again, the song is strong enough on its own that you could have played it on an acoustic guitar or piano, this one really benefits from that layered production because it gives it that weighty, iconic punch that really helps. And listen at the end of the album, which is almost a Sting-like song, if you will, really just tops it out in a great way. And there were so many wonderful guest musicians. The great Mel Collins, who's played with everyone from King Crimson to the Rolling Stones and literally everyone in between. One of the best session saxophonists ever. He was on the album. Jerry Marotta, who played drums and percussion with Peter Gabriel, he was on it. So many truly interesting musicians. It was really a kind of cast of thousands, in addition to the two main members of Tears for Fears, Roland Orzabal Thomas Paul and Kurt Smith, they really created something special. And it's really stood the test of time. And again, like other albums like Peter Gabriel's So, it shows that you can use these very 80s instruments and production techniques without necessarily dating yourself. I talked in an earlier video about how the 80s was the lost decade when music really sounded like the future, because you had all of this new technology sort of coalescing at one moment in time. The way that drums were produced with the gated sound, the electronic drums from companies like Simmons, all of the new polyphonic synthesizers, samplers, sequencers, early digital synthesizers, MIDI. And it really was this great congregation of all of these new and exciting sounds. And by the 90s, people were fed up with the future and they wanted everything to just sort of sound like everything else. And so, love it or hate it, the 80s production style really made a strong statement. And frankly, few albums did it as good as Songs from the Big Chair. Definitely check it out. Tears for Fears masterpiece, without doubt. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.